High-contrast visuals meet high-stakes storytelling in a way you've never seen before. Experience a world filled with intense drama and vivid 3D art that brings every emotion to life on your screen. Subscribe now for a truly cinematic feast of the senses.
"You know I make all the money in this house, right?" He said it with a smile. Not a cruel smile, not exactly, more like the kind a man gives when he wants you to know he's doing you a favor just by being there. My husband had a gift for that, wrapping a knife in a bow and handing it to you like a present. I laughed. That was the year we got married. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. My name is Claire. I'm 37 years old. I was a middle school English teacher for 11 years, and for 9 of those years, I was also a wife. I say was because that chapter is closed now, sealed, filed, and archived somewhere my husband never expected it would end up. This is the story of how I planned the quietest exit of my life, and how my husband helped me do it without ever knowing. When my husband and I met, he was charming in the way that architects sometimes are: precise, confident, always the most certain person in the room. His name was Daniel. He had broad shoulders and a habit of explaining things to people who hadn't asked. The first time we went to dinner, he ordered for me before I'd looked at the menu. I thought it was romantic. Later I understood it was just practice. We got married on a Saturday in October, 10 years ago this past fall. The leaves were orange and gold outside the venue. My mother cried. His mother told me I'd done well for myself. I was 27 and in love, and I didn't understand yet what that comment meant. The first year was good. The second year was fine. By the third year, the comments had started. "You're lucky I handle the finances, you'd be a mess. I love you, but you know you couldn't afford this house on a teacher's salary. Don't get emotional, I'm just being honest with you." He was never violent. I want to be clear about that, not because it makes what happened less serious, but because for a long time I told myself that meant everything was fine. He never raised a hand. He raised his voice occasionally, but mostly what he raised was doubt. Slow, persistent, carefully placed doubt about my judgment, my capabilities, my value without him. I started to believe it. That's the thing nobody tells you about that kind of marriage. It doesn't feel like abuse while it's happening. It feels like reality. It feels like you're just a woman who is fortunate enough to have a husband who keeps things running, who makes good money, who is patient with your limitations. It took me until year 7 to understand that I didn't actually have limitations. I had a husband who needed me to believe I did. I found out about her on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday, nothing cinematic about it. I'd come home early from a staff development day that got cancelled, and I was sitting at the kitchen table going through a stack of mail when his laptop dinged with a notification. He'd left it open. I wasn't snooping. I genuinely wasn't. But the preview was right there on the screen, and the words I read in that little gray rectangle changed the entire shape of my life. "Miss you already. Last night was everything." Her name was Renee. She worked at his firm. They had apparently been everything to each other for about 14 months. I closed the laptop. I put the mail back in the pile. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bathtub, and breathed very carefully for about 20 minutes. I did not cry. I remember being surprised by that. I had expected tears, had always imagined that if I ever found out something like this, I would fall apart. Instead I felt something I can only describe as a door closing. Not slamming. Just quietly, deliberately, clicking shut. Then I got very, very calm. I did not confront him that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. I went to school. I taught my 7th graders about metaphor and theme. I came home and made dinner and asked about his day and listened to him talk about a commercial project his firm had landed. I nodded in the right places. I poured his wine. And every morning before he woke up, I was building something he would never see coming. The first person I called was my sister. Not to cry, though I did, once, on her couch with a cup of tea going cold in my hands, but because she was the sharpest person I knew and I needed someone to think with. Her name is Meg. She's 5 years older than me, and she once told me that the secret to never being blindsided was to always be 3 steps ahead. She said that to me when we were teenagers, about boys, about tests, about life. Turns out it applied here too. Don't touch anything, she said. Don't move money, don't send emails, don't say a word. Give me 48 hours. She knew a family attorney. Not a friend, a professional, someone discreet and deliberate. A woman named Patricia who specialized in exactly this kind of situation and who had, according to Meg, seen every version of this story there is. I met with Patricia on a Thursday afternoon, during my prep period. I told her everything: the comments, the finances, the laptop notification, the 14 months, the way my name wasn't on the investment accounts even though I'd contributed to them for years. She listened without interrupting. She took notes. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me. Did you know, she said, that in this state, any written agreement between spouses regarding asset division can be considered legally binding if it meets certain criteria, including that both parties signed it willingly? I didn't know that. She slid a folder across the table. Start here. Here's something about my husband that mattered more than I'd realized. He had a habit of making grand declarations when he was drinking. Not sloppy declarations, he wasn't that type of drunk. He was the kind that got expansive. Generous, even. He liked to hold a glass of scotch and talk about what he would do, what he would give, what he deserved and intended to share with the people lucky enough to be in his orbit. His friends loved these moments. They called it Daniel at full volume. There was one night, about 3 years into our marriage, when we'd had his partners and their wives over for dinner. It was late, the second bottle of wine was empty, and Daniel had moved on to scotch. He was talking about the house, how much it had appreciated, what it would be worth in 10 years, how he'd built something real. And then, because I'd been quiet, because I'd been sitting there watching him hold court in our home that I had decorated and maintained and made into the place people wanted to come to, he'd looked at me across the table and said, loudly, in front of everyone, "This house is yours as much as mine. You know that, right? Everything I have is yours." His friends had laughed and toasted. His business partner had said, "Get that in writing, Claire." Everyone had laughed again. And then Daniel had picked up a cocktail napkin and a pen and written in his precise architect's handwriting, "I hereby agree that Claire is entitled to full and equal share of all marital assets, including the property at our address." He'd signed it, dated it, slid it across the table to me with a grin. "There," he'd said. In writing. I had folded it up and put it in my pocket. He had forgotten about it before the guests left. I had not forgotten about it. I'd kept it in a box in the back of my closet for 6 years. I hadn't known why, exactly. Just that something in me said, keep this. I'd thought about it sometimes, turned it over in my mind the way you turn over a detail in a story when you're not sure yet what it means. When I slid it across Patricia's desk, she held it under the lamp for a long moment. Then she looked up at me. "Where has this been?" "A box," I said. "In my closet." She nodded slowly. "And his signature is on file with the county from your property deed?" "Yes." "And there were witnesses at this dinner?" I named 2 couples. Both still lived locally. Both, as it happened, had clear memories of that night. Patricia set the napkin down very carefully. "Claire," she said, "I want you to let me make some calls. The anniversary party was my husband's idea. That part still strikes me, sometimes. He planned it. He sent the invitations. He booked the private room at the restaurant where we'd had our rehearsal dinner, because he liked the symmetry of it. 10 years. He'd been telling people for months, his colleagues, his parents, our neighbors, that he was doing something special. I found out later, from Meg, that Renee had thought the party meant he was ending things with her. That he was recommitting. She'd apparently cried about it. He had not been ending things with her. He had been planning to announce, at the party, that we were separating. He told his best friend, a man named Scott, who I had always found slightly too pleased with himself, about 2 weeks before. Scott had thought this was a reasonable plan. He'd apparently said something like, "Rip the bandage off, people will understand." What Daniel had not told Scott, or Renee, or anyone, was that he had already spoken to his own attorney and had papers drawn up. He was going to hand them to me at the party. Publicly. He thought, I later understood, that I would be too shocked, too embarrassed, too desperate not to make a scene in front of our friends and family, to do anything other than crumble. He thought I would cry. He had known me for 11 years, and he still thought I would cry. The night of the party, I wore a blue dress. Not dramatic, just a clean, simple blue that I knew looked good. My sister helped me with my hair. She didn't say much. She just stood behind me at the mirror and put her hands on my shoulders for a moment before we left, and that was enough. The restaurant was warm and softly lit, and the room was full of people we'd known for years: his parents, my parents, colleagues, old friends. The couples from that dinner 6 years ago who had witnessed a man write something on a napkin and slide it across a table like it was nothing. Daniel looked handsome. He was good at occasions, knew how to hold a room, how to make a toast, how to be the man everyone was glad to know. He kissed me on the cheek when I came in. He got me a glass of sparkling water. He knew I wasn't drinking that evening, he just didn't know why. The dinner was good. The speeches were warm. His father talked about watching Daniel become a man. My mother talked about the day I'd called her to say I'd met someone. There was laughter, and clinking glasses. And the particular sweetness of a room full of people who genuinely wished you well. I watched Daniel across the table. He caught my eye once and gave me a smile, that particular smile. The one that was also a door closing. The one that said, "I'm the one who decides how this goes." I smiled back. He reached into his jacket. I reached into my bag. He said, "Before the evening goes any further, I have something I need to share." The room quieted. People leaned in. His mother looked expectant. Mine looked uncertain. She'd always had good instincts. He set a cream-colored envelope on the table and slid it toward me. "Claire," he said. "I think we both know this chapter has run its course." No one spoke. I looked at the envelope. Then I reached into my bag and set a gold envelope on the table. Thick paper. Sealed with a small sticker. I slid it toward him. "I thought you might feel that way," I said. "So I brought something too." He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He picked it up. Inside were 3 things. The first was a copy of that cocktail napkin from 6 years ago, his handwriting, his signature, his date now notarized, verified, and attached to a legal declaration co-signed by 2 witnesses who had been present at that dinner and who had provided sworn statements to Patricia's office 4 days prior. The second was a letter from Patricia's firm, outlining the asset entitlements that document created, including full and equal claim to the property, and to the investment accounts I'd contributed to and been quietly removed from. The third was a single printed email. His. To her. "Miss you already. Last night was everything." Dated, time-stamped, and noted as Exhibit C in the filing that Patricia had submitted to the county clerk's office that morning. We were already filed. The papers in his envelope were the response, not the opening. He read the first page. Then the second. The color left his face in a way I had never seen before. Not anger, not bluster, just a very sudden, very complete understanding of what had happened. Scott, sitting 2 seats down, leaned over and said, "Daniel, what is it?" My husband didn't answer. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. She looked at me for a long moment, and then the corner of her mouth moved, just barely, in the way it does when she is trying very hard not to smile. "I think," I said to the room, calm as I have ever been in my life, "that this might be a good time for dessert." The months that followed were not easy. I won't pretend otherwise, because the women who need to hear this story need to hear the truth of it. There were nights I ate cereal for dinner because I was too tired to cook. There were phone calls with Patricia that left me with a headache and a legal pad full of notes I had to read twice to understand. There was the day I drove to the storage unit where I'd moved my things and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes before I could make myself go in. There was also the morning I woke up in the small rental house I'd found 3 miles from my school and realized, lying there in the quiet, that no one was going to make a comment about what I was or wasn't capable of. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever again in my own home. I made coffee. I sat by the window. The light came in. I had been so afraid for so long of being without him, not because I loved the man he'd become, but because he had spent 9 years convincing me that I couldn't manage without him. That I was dependent, that I was lucky. What I understood that morning, in a way I couldn't have understood before, was that I had been building things the whole time. Quiet things. Invisible things. A classroom where children learned to find meaning in words, a home people wanted to be in. A marriage that looked whole from the outside because I had worked to make it so. I had done all of that. He had just been standing nearby. The house settled in Patricia's favor, our favor, about 4 months later. His attorney had argued that the napkin document was informal, was written under the influence, was never intended as a legal agreement. Patricia had 2 witnesses, notarization, and 11 years of documentation that said otherwise. Daniel ended up in a 2-bedroom apartment across town. I heard through mutual friends that things with Renee didn't last past the first month. I can't say I was surprised. A man who treats his wife like a liability tends to run out of people willing to extend him credit. I stayed in the house. I painted the living room a deep, quiet green, a color Daniel had always said was too dark. I put books on every surface. I got a dog. A ridiculous golden retriever named Footnote, who has destroyed 2 throw pillows and 1 garden hose and who sleeps at the foot of my bed like he's been there forever. Meg came over for dinner the first Saturday after it was all final. We sat on the back porch with wine and didn't talk about any of it for a long time. The evening was warm. The yard was dark and soft. Finally she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Not the performance of the feeling, not what I was supposed to say, just the actual, specific answer. Like I remembered something I'd forgotten, I said. She nodded. She understood. I had been someone before I was his wife. I had been someone capable and whole and full of direction. Someone who read late into the night and had opinions about things and laughed loudly. And took up exactly the amount of space she was entitled to take up. I had set that person down somewhere around year 3, quietly, without making a fuss, because it had seemed easier than the alternative. She had been waiting. Patiently, as it turned out, the way good things do. I still teach. I still stand in front of 23 12-year-olds every morning and talk about what words can do, how the right sentence at the right moment can open something up in a person that had been sealed shut, how a story can say the thing you didn't know you needed to hear. I tell my students that the most important thing a piece of writing can do is be honest. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just honest and precise, and willing to say the real thing even when it's easier to say something comfortable instead. I try to do that. My husband bet I would fall apart. He built 9 years of architecture around that assumption that I was the kind of woman who could be managed, predicted, contained. He didn't understand that all that time he was wrong about me, I had been quietly learning how right I was about myself. He slid an envelope across a table thinking it was the ending. He hadn't noticed that I'd already written the last chapter. Neither had I, honestly, not until I was holding the pen. If you're sitting somewhere right now reading this, feeling like you are somehow less than the life you're living, I need you to hear this. She didn't leave. She's just been waiting for you to go back and get her. Go get her. She's been there the whole time.